There is a fatal flaw in our medical system. There is no way to know how much human suffering it has caused, but I believe I have seen it ruin the lives of some people close to me. I'm guessing you've seen it too. But I believe it can all be fixed, and I know how to do it, without relying on regulations or taxes. The problem is simple. A patient cured is a customer lost. You've heard this before. Perhaps this idea puts you off because it sounds like a conspiracy theory. But the reality of the problem is usually more about cold, passionless bureaucracy and board meetings concerned with shareholder value. But this video is not about convincing you the problem is real. I don't want to get lost in providing examples that can be argued away with ever more nitpicky detail. I see this problem as self-evident, especially given how it's harmed people in my life, and will assume that you see it as self-evident as well. But if you're undecided on that, I think this video will help you get a grasp of the situation better. He's an MIT-educated neurosurgeon who left his field after 20 years of experience due to a crisis of meaning when he realized that the medical industry is not what it seems. I think this video does an excellent job of showing how the problem does not spring from evil conspiracies, but rather from simple market forces. I'll link this video in the description. Let's lay out real quick what exactly is going wrong and why. It's all too easy to depict corporations as evil or malicious, but in reality, corporations are better thought of as wild animals. Except instead of ravenously hunting for calories, corporations ravenously hunt for currency. All corporations will attempt to take actions that yield the highest revenue at the lowest cost, whether that means doing good things or evil things. And they will always promote to their highest seats of power the people most willing to pursue shareholder value at all costs. So, getting rid of a CEO that the public sees as evil is inherently meaningless, as the system will just replace them with more of the same. Corporations do not need to be destroyed, or decapitated, or reformed. They need to be tamed. Even the most ferocious beasts can be tamed using a simple method. When the beast behaves how you want it to behave, you give it tasty calories. Eventually, the beast figures out the connection, and learns that it can get what it wants by doing what you want it to do. Conversely, if your dog won't stop barking, and you give it a treat hoping to shut it up, you have ensured that your dog will bark as frequently as possible whenever it wants a treat. This begs the question, what have we trained medical corporations to do? That is, what behaviors do we give them money for? To understand this, let's consider the following contrasting examples. You desire a good table at a cheap price. You go to a corporation that sells tables. You can clearly tell which tables seem sturdy, well-made, and beautiful, and the prices are clearly listed. If you don't like this corporation's offerings, you can look elsewhere. You only make the purchase when it is clear to you that the table is what you want, and that you're okay with the price. So, you want a good table at a cheap price. You only pay the corporation when it provides a good table at a cheap price. Therefore, you train the corporation to provide good tables at cheap prices. You desire to be healthy. You go to a medical facility. They recommend a bunch of expensive tests. You have no way to tell which of these tests are legitimately necessary. You undergo them. They then tell you they think you have a specific problem, and recommend indefinite medication, writing you a prescription. You have no capability to decipher how legitimate these concerns are, and must blindly trust them about what the risks are. You desire to be healthy, therefore you should pay corporations when they improve your health, thus training them to improve your health. But you cannot do this. You are completely unable to decipher which actions will improve your health. Instead, you pay them when they provide exams, tests, and treatments. You pay them for these things whether they are helpful or not. Even if you eventually find out that a medication only made things worse, the corporations have generally made their money already. You can try to sue them, but these sorts of things are already factored into their bottom line. Therefore, you have trained the medical corporations to provide and recommend as many exams, tests, and treatments as possible, with very little concern over their efficacy, and very little concern over discovering or addressing the root cause of whatever is wrong with you. They get rewarded for diagnoses, whether they are right or wrong. They get rewarded for treatments, whether the treatments are useless or actively harmful. The table example works out well for you because you want a good table at a cheap price, and you reward the corporation for providing one. By contrast, in the medical example, you want health, but you have no way to reward the corporation for providing it, because you can't tell what's healthy in the first place. The problem can hence be rephrased simply. How can we train corporations to provide health? I've been periodically obsessing over this problem, partially because of the people in my life who are directly affected by it, but also because it feels solvable. I'm simply convinced there's got to be some way to align incentives. To pay companies for medical services, but only conditionally on those medical services having positive health effects. To align incentives for customer benefit, two things must occur. First, we need to be able to measure how healthy each customer is. Second, we need to use this measurement to ensure that companies get more income the healthier their customers are. Doing these two things successfully will train companies to compete with one another to maximize the health of their customers. However, these things are deceptively complicated, and we need to be aware of how each party may try to manipulate any given system to their advantage. Let's take it step by step. How do we measure health? A lot of things probably pop up in your mind. There should be a battery of tests. Measure blood pressure, cholesterol, body mass index, and so on and so forth. Mass all of these metrics together, turn it into a percentage value between 0 and 100, and that's your health metric. I've thought a lot about this over the years, and despite the positive intentions, I think this method is going the entirely wrong direction. These things are merely our current best guess at what an average healthy body looks like. Every body is different in various ways, and it could be that it's healthy for a specific person to differ from the norm in specific ways. It's also possible that we could simply be incorrect about some of these metrics, like what currently appears to be happening surrounding the medical literature of cholesterol. Given a system like this, companies also have great incentive to manipulate the tests, or to push for certain things to be included or excluded from the metric. The metric also doesn't include for the emergence of health conditions. What if someone gets a herniated disc, but otherwise has great stats for everything that the metric factors in? Does the metric need a clause in it where you lose 20 points of health if you have a herniated disc? Then do we need a special clause in the metric for every possible health condition that's not a part of our test battery? And what about mental health? Certain drugs can and do have mental health effects, so you'd want mental health to be a part of this equation. How do you measure that? Do we need regular psychiatric tests as well? In addition to this all being extremely complicated and expensive to test, tally, and manage, there's a problem lurking here. This system would encourage medical companies to avoid diagnosing problems. You may be complaining about severe back pain to your doctors. If they recommend certain diagnostic procedures, they might discover that you have a herniated disc. If they do, and they give you the diagnosis, your health score will be lower, and the company will get less income. This scenario encourages companies to label customers as healthy, no matter what's happening to them, and ignore and fail to diagnose serious conditions, and do the absolute minimum for everyone involved. This approach will fail. Because of this conclusion alone, I dropped this entire quest several times. Health is obviously extremely difficult to quantify, and because of that, you can't just mash it down into a simple metric. But eventually, I figured it out. There is a way, and it's easy. So easy, in fact, that it sounds ridiculous. But I'm convinced it's the right way to do it, and that it solves for all of the problems that I've listed. How do you measure someone's health? You ask them how they're doing. I'm serious. Just bear with me for a bit. All health problems, mental and physical, and even spiritual really, will eventually be caught by this simple test. A short survey, asking the customer to rate a short list of items on a scale of 1 to 10. How good they feel on a day-to-day basis, how satisfying their life is, how often they experience bodily pains or discomfort, things like that. The key here is that plenty of health conditions take a long time to reveal symptoms, so corporations would need to only be rewarded for keeping this metric high over a long term. That is, most of the pay for medical services would need to be delayed for a long time, given out gradually based off of the customer's long-term survey responses. Also, it's easy for customers to lie on surveys, so in order for this to work, it would be crucial that customers have no incentive to lie, and hence, might as well tell the truth. Customers can take this short survey once per month or once per quarter, and this easily and cheaply generates our health metric. Crucially, this method would catch all health problems, even the ones we don't know how to test for yet, and even problems caused by side effects of long-term medication use, or surgery complications. Corporations would be much more careful about long-term negative impacts of short-term therapies, and would be deeply motivated to catch health problems often and early enough to turn them around cheaply, which is exactly the behavior that we want to see. So, we have a system where customers are taking monthly surveys, measuring their subjective sense of health. How do we make sure that corporations are paid in direct proportion to customers' long-term health outcomes? Let's consider the first system that comes to mind. The customer signs up with a health corporation. Each month, the customer pays a set amount of money to the corporation, but that amount is modulated by the survey. Let's say John chooses a $200 a month plan with the boringly named hypothetical medical company, the Doctor Corporation. Each month, John will take the survey and pay $200 multiplied by his result. That is, if John submits that he feels 100% healthy on his survey, he pays the Doctor Corporation $200, the full amount. And if he submits that he feels 0% healthy on his survey, he pays the Doctor Corporation $0. This arrangement is terrible for a very simple reason. John is incentivized to claim that he feels terrible all the time, saving him tons of money. As mentioned before, for the survey method of health estimation to be successful, the survey taker must have no incentive to lie. That means that whatever system we design must have John paying a set amount of money each month, regardless of what his survey results are. So, John always pays $200 no matter what his survey results are. Meanwhile, the amount that the Doctor Corporation receives each month must be modulated by John's survey results in order to encourage them to keep him healthy. So let's say in a given month, John submits in his survey that he feels 50% healthy. John pays $200, and the Doctor Corporation receives $100. Where does the rest of the money go? I got stuck here for a long time. Maybe it goes to the government to help fund other programs. Maybe it goes to charity. Maybe it goes to a third-party organization that has its own responsibilities. This is all a trap. There is a big problem here. The Doctor Corporation gets more money if you are healthy, but the other entity, be it the government or some other organization, gets more money if you are unhealthy. This may succeed in getting the Doctor Corporation on your side, promoting your health, but whoever receives the rest of the money has the exact opposite incentive. They would financially benefit from harming the Doctor Corporation's customers. We might hope that they don't discover secret ways to do this, but in my opinion, this perverse incentive would ruin the system. This was another blockade that made me give up on this quest several times. It seems impossible to avoid. If you're splitting John's payments up based off of his health, obviously one recipient would be motivated to make John healthy, and the other recipient would be motivated to harm him. But yet again, there is a solution, and yet again, it feels kind of ridiculous. Where does the rest of the money go? Away. The rest of the money goes away. The money goes to no one, or at least to no one specific. It is crucial that whoever receives it doesn't know that they are the recipient until they receive it, or that it is spread out so far and wide that no individual organization has a statistically significant reason to harm John or other customers of the Doctor Corporation. Perhaps the money is given away to random people in the form of a lottery. Perhaps the money is simply burnt, thereby spreading its value out across all existing dollars via deflation of the currency. It doesn't really matter so long as no organization or individual has significant incentive to harm people to increase their take. These two eureka moments. First, that the best health metric is a simple survey over a long term, and second, that a portion of the money that John is paying goes to someone random, are the keys to making this system work. With these keys in place, let's lay out a concrete example with a few more embellishments and features. Consider three entities: a customer, John, a healthcare provider, the Doctor Corporation, and an intermediary company, Fund Forwarders Inc. John signs up with the Doctor Corporation for medical services, selecting a $200 per month plan. John selects Fund Forwarders Inc. to be the intermediary for these transactions. Fund Forwarders creates an account, linking John and the Doctor Corporation. Each month, John pays $200 into this fund, and takes a short health survey. At the end of each month, Fund Forwarders takes 1% of the money currently in the fund and splits it as determined by the survey, giving some to the Doctor Corporation and the rest being given away at random via lottery. The Fund Forwarders keep a small fraction of these transactions as fees to sustain their operations. The Fund Forwarders also return a tiny amount of the money to John each time he completes a survey, regardless of his results, to encourage him to do surveys consistently every month. Any surveys that aren't completed are treated as zeros. For instance, if John dies and stops filling out surveys, his health score is treated as a 0 for every survey from then on. This encourages health providers to ensure that customers stay healthy and alive for as long as possible, because once they die, everything left in the fund is going to trickle away via lottery. The fund will gradually grow until the 1% removed each month is equal to the $200 contributed each month, meaning the fund will eventually balance out at a stable $20,000. This has the effect of gradually pooling more and more incentive for the Doctor Corporation to keep and maintain John's well-being. If John dies, or something terrible happens to him that causes his quality of life to plummet, the money stops flowing. I call this the well-being alignment model. In principle, it aligns the incentives of the healthcare provider with the customer's well-being. But what does John actually receive for his money? What is he buying exactly? To understand this, let's look at the situation from the perspective of the Doctor Corporation. John isn't actually purchasing anything specific. Instead, he is offering a bounty for the improvement of his own well-being. Let's imagine that John is only one of many customers of the Doctor Corporation. If you were the Doctor Corporation, what would you do? To bring up this video again, it makes a very salient point. Surgeries and medications are generally band-aids that don't fix the root of most health problems. The real fixes, he suggests, are diet, exercise, good sleep, stress management, and developing meaningful relationships. He describes that people who had these things often healed all on their own, needing to cancel their spine surgeries. Conversely, for people doing poorly in these categories, surgeries seem to provide only a temporary fix before something else in their bodies would break again. Now, this isn't always the case. Sometimes surgeries are just necessary. Things do break. But I think it's really critical to understand that these more simple things are the keys to good long-term health: diet, exercise, good sleep, stress management, and developing meaningful friendships. In this light, there are many actions you could take as the Doctor Corporation for your customers. You could come up with a cheap system to gamify their lifestyle choices. You could hire someone locally whose job it was to meet once a month with each customer and just talk to them for an hour. With enough customers, you could fund research on the long-term effects of various medications, treatments, foods, or careers. With that information, you could then offer advice to your customers, guiding them towards paths that statistically lead to better life outcomes. For instance, you may hear during a meeting with a client that they are complaining about being groggy and tired all the time, and you may wonder if they have sleep apnea. You could then offer to pay for them to undergo a sleep study. This would cost you several $1,000s, but if it correctly diagnoses the issue and improves their life semi-permanently with a CPAP machine, you'll earn back more than you invested over time. Or maybe you detect your client is struggling with stress. You may recommend reducing their work commitments or referring them to a meditation class. In fact, if the Doctor Corporation is a big enough entity, and if several of its customers work at a given company, it will naturally be incentivized to act sort of like a union. negotiating with the company directly to reduce the workloads of its clients. The fascinating effect of the well-being alignment model is that the provider company has no reason to limit itself to medical concerns. If a customer loses his job, the provider company has a great incentive to help him find employment again. If a customer has grown isolated and doesn't have a lot of friends, the provider company has a great incentive to find ways to foster new connections for that individual. Perhaps providing meetups for fun, maybe some social activities or community-led clubs. It's impossible for us to predict what provider companies would decide to do for their customers, because that will be essentially their job to figure out how best to allocate money to maximize the well-being of their customers. Interestingly, if a customer increases their monthly payment, that effectively increases the bounty offered in exchange for their well-being, which in turn automatically increases the amount that the provider company can spend on that customer while still being cost-effective. That is, the more you pay as a customer, the more free stuff and attention you get from the provider. At the same time, since rich customers will bring in a lot of money for the provider, more research can be done on how to cheaply increase quality of life. And since information sharing is basically free, the results of these studies can be shared to cheaply boost the quality of life for all customers, rich and poor alike. I wouldn't expect provider companies in this model to be the ones performing medical treatments. They would be more focused on recommending certain treatments and encouraging customers to avoid certain other treatments that they have detected aren't justified by short and long-term risks. Finally, while providers would definitely like you to commit as much money as possible to the fund, they also don't want to bleed you dry. In fact, since income correlates with happiness up to a certain amount, provider companies would have an incentive for you to earn lots of money and not spend wastefully on things that don't actually provide well-being. After all, even if you committed a ton of money to your wellness fund, if you go broke and your quality of life plummets, the provider won't benefit from any of your wellness fund money. So far, this has all been reliant on an intermediary company, the fund forwarders in our example, doing its job honestly and consistently. There are many ways here that the fund forwarders could lie in order to pocket a lot of the money flowing through them. However, there is a way we can manage and enforce the good behavior of the intermediaries without having to trust the company, or having to trust something like government audits, which can be subject to bribes. Bitcoin is a public ledger that can be audited by anyone. While it is not always known which wallet addresses are owned by which human beings, the entire transaction history between wallets is public information. If all of the intermediary companies' transactions were performed in Bitcoin, or any cryptocurrency with similar properties, the public could be allowed to check its work. Consider the following. For an intermediary company to be trusted by providers and customers enough to do business, the intermediary company promises to release each month a ledger of its own. The ledger contains the following information: a line for each provider company, showing their public wallet address and the total amount sent to them by the intermediary. A line for each customer, but without naming them, showing their public wallet address, their survey score for that month, the total amount of money in their fund, and the public wallet address of the provider they have a payment plan with. And finally, the amount of money thrown away. The intermediary company's ledger could then be compared with the Bitcoin ledger, proving that the listed customer intermediary and intermediary provider transactions occurred. The total amounts that should have been sent to each provider can be tallied up independently from the listed survey scores and fund totals, and if things aren't adding up, anyone can blow the whistle and easily demonstrate why. Even though customers are listed anonymously on the intermediary ledger, each provider can ensure that the number of customers associated with the provider in the ledger is correct. In addition, individual customers can check the intermediary ledger to make sure that their public wallet address is listed and that the fund amounts are correct. Very few people would do this, but that's fine. Finally, confirming the amount of money thrown away depends on how it was thrown away. The simplest method for the intermediary to handle that money is to establish a new Bitcoin wallet and publish its private keys online. Any money transferred to that Bitcoin wallet will be swept away by essentially someone random. The transaction from the intermediary to the Bitcoin wallet can be confirmed on the Bitcoin ledger, thus proving that the intermediary isn't pocketing the cash. If the thrown away money is instead given away via a lottery system, there would need to be different information on the intermediary ledger to make sure that this is provable by independent individuals. As soon as any of these values don't add up, the intermediary company has blown its credibility completely. The providers and customers need to ensure that any intermediary company they use has within its contract extreme penalties for failing to provide its ledger in a timely manner, and for providing ledgers with discrepancies. So, that's the well-being alignment model. Basically, customers pay regular amounts to an intermediary company and take surveys measuring their overall wellness. The intermediary company then trickles this money out to the customer's selected provider company over many years. But each payment is limited to an amount determined by the customer's wellness survey, with the excess money being given to someone entirely random. Providers are then free to act as they see fit, knowing that their income will increase the happier and healthier their customers are. It's worth pointing out that although our original angle was to fix the medical industry's incentives by changing how they get paid, this model doesn't exactly accomplish that. Instead, it erects a new company that operates between you and the medical industry. Your wellness alignment model provider then acts as your agent, advocating for your long-term interest and giving you advice. You'll still be paying pharmaceutical companies for medications when you need them, but your provider will be able to call out when prescriptions are being given out unnecessarily and are likely to do more harm than good over time. They have a motivation to be honest with you about the side effects, whereas the pharmaceutical industry has a motivation to downplay them. You'll still be paying the medical industry directly when you need emergency surgery, but your provider will be motivated to actually determine which procedures done by which doctors do yield long-term healing, and how best to go about physical therapy or pain medication. I want to wrap up by going over some miscellaneous concepts surrounding this model. When I originally formulated this idea, I was assuming it had to be its own custom cryptocurrency. In some ways, that still seems ideal. In theory, you wouldn't need intermediary companies at all. All the money management and gradual payments to providers would be automated into the formation of new blocks on the chain. I was discouraged away from this because of the completely valid skepticism people seem to have towards new cryptocurrencies. There are countless cryptocurrencies, many claiming to solve fundamental problems of the world, kinda like this, right up until the creators dump their bags and run away with everyone's money. I then realized it could be done with Bitcoin and came up with the concept of the intermediary company. I don't personally care whether the wellness alignment model concept is implemented through Bitcoin, a different cryptocurrency, or a newly made custom cryptocurrency. I do think it is critical that whatever cryptocurrency is chosen has a finite supply, since the model fundamentally assumes that whatever amounts are contributed by the customers stay financially relevant for decades. On that note, the current volatility of cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, does add some concerns around the wellness alignment model. Specifically, if the value of Bitcoin suddenly jumps up 5x, then equally as suddenly, the amount of money that the provider is encouraged to spend on you jumps up 5x. And it goes both ways. If the value of Bitcoin suddenly plummets, the amount of money the provider is willing to spend on each customer also plummets. I don't personally see this as a problem. I expect some people to say that if Bitcoin and the economy both fail at once, they don't want their health insurance to suddenly vanish. In my opinion, it is wrong to think of your wellness alignment model provider as health insurance. Insurance is a service that you pay for regularly in the hopes that if you have a sudden dramatic expense, they will cover it for you. Your wellness alignment model provider does not replace health insurance. Its job is to aid your decision making, motivate you towards healthier paths, and analyze whether specific treatments will be beneficial for you in the long term before you take them. When the underlying asset is up, the provider can do lots of research and experimental programs on how to most efficiently improve customer well-being. When the underlying asset is down, the provider can cut out the wasteful or excessive customer service programs, halt research for a moment, and focus on the cheapest basics. Note that the information they discovered during the good times, such as the effectiveness of certain treatments or the health benefits of various foods, can still be distributed to customers almost for free in the bad times. Having a business which is heavily incentivized to look out for your long-term well-being, but whose budget is very volatile, is still an improvement over the current system, where the businesses involved in health are not at all incentivized to look out for your long-term well-being. As described thus far, this is a lot of on-chain transactions. There's no getting around the fact that crypto fees will be necessary. But I think it's worth pointing out that several orders of magnitude of the fees can be chopped off. For instance, rather than needing one transaction per provider per customer, the intermediary can bundle all of that up and just have a single transaction per provider. It could also have customers make yearly instead of monthly payments to reduce the transaction count on that side by 12 times. Also, it could make survey completion rewards for customers a discount on their monthly payments rather than an individual on-chain transaction. Customers and providers also don't necessarily need to pay or receive payment in crypto at all for this to work. They could pay in their local currency, which the intermediary then uses to buy the crypto, so long as the intermediary's ledger is still able to be independently audited by the public. It's important for customers to be able to shop around and find the best providers. One nice thing about this model is that by the very existence of the intermediary's ledger, it will be entirely public knowledge how happy and healthy the customers for each provider are. For instance, you could see quite clearly that provider A has an average happiness of 40%, provider B has an average happiness of 70%. So that'll help you shop for different providers. Customers can switch to new providers, or have multiple providers at once. Consider a customer that has a fund managed by an intermediary, currently holding $800 of Bitcoin, which is being used to pay provider A. The customer wants to switch to provider B. The intermediary opens a new fund to handle payments between the customer and provider B. Even though the customer is no longer paying into the provider A fund, the intermediary still manages it, paying provider A from it based on the customer's surveys each month. It's important to reward and punish providers for the long-term results of their recommendations, even if the customer has moved on to other providers. Hence, moving on to another provider shouldn't knock out or repurpose the funds already committed to that company's services. I mentioned this detail when I was describing the mechanics, but I thought it was worth mentioning why I think it's important. Customers' survey responses should be kept blind from the perspective of the providers. Providers will obviously be very interested in what score each of their customers gave on their surveys. Surely, providers will simply ask their customers what they put on their surveys, and many customers will tell them. However, I think it's important, though not necessarily critical, that customers keep this information private, and that the intermediary ledger keeps this anonymous. If providers can see their customers' survey scores, they will be incentivized to learn which customers barely respond to their interventions, and then completely stop spending money on those people. Conversely, they will be incentivized to identify customers who are more impressionable and spend all of their resources on them. Customers should hence be wary about sharing their survey results with providers, and of telling them which public wallet address is theirs. One concern with this model is that it takes a long time for providers to begin to make significant income from a given customer. This is basically a necessary component of any model that tries to force businesses to consider long-term consequences. In general, the financial industry makes this a non-issue. After all, upfront investments for long-term returns are more or less the whole point of business loans. But this will especially be a big problem early on, before the model has been proven to investors. I have a feeling many people will dislike the notion that some of their money will just be given away without anything in return, whether by lottery or by dumping into a public Bitcoin wallet. These people are wrong. This money certainly isn't wasted. It is spent enticing providers to work harder on improving your life. Nevertheless, I expect some people to not be able to escape this subjective frame of mind, even if the model ends up proving itself with flying colors and its benefits are widely accepted. I think we need to try this model out. I know that the real world can do strange things with complicated systems, so I have to stop short of saying that this system will solve all of our problems, or even that it'll solve more issues than it causes. Sometimes economies are strange. But there's a chance I've stumbled upon something critical. If I can increase the chances of this idea catching on, I want to do so. We don't need this to become mainstream. We just need it to be tried out by an adventurous group of hopefuls. It can begin small, in a small community, where the provider, intermediary, and customers all know each other. If the model works out, it should be able to grow and scale like any other successful business. So please share this video. Steal the idea. Spread it, modify it, improve it. Re-upload it if you want. It's far more important to me that this idea gets out there than that it is mine. I think we desperately need something like this. And not just because of medicine. With artificial general intelligence on the horizon, having a system to motivate AI companies to pursue human flourishing seems crucial. We won't know it works until we try it. So, that's it. Thank you so much for listening. I know it was a long video. I just really had to get these ideas out there. Thanks, and have a good one.